This is the IBJ podcast for the week of February 20th, 2023, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We're releasing episode 241 a few days early because it aligns with a major project IBJ is publishing on Friday, February 17th. Most of that issue of IBJ is dedicated to the challenges facing downtown Indianapolis after the darkest days of the pandemic. And I'll have more on that later. But for this week's podcast, I wanted to feature an organization that has been an integral part of downtown for more than 100 years and is intrinsically linked to quality of life issues and downtown's image. You've passed its flagship location in the Mile Square at least 100 times, but you very likely have a limited sense of all that it offers. It's the Wheeler mission, and it's in the middle of the first change in its top leadership in 33 years. When Rick Alvis became president and CEO in 1990, Wheeler Mission had 17 employees and an annual budget of about $700,000. Today, it has about 200 employees and an annual budget of nearly $20 million. On any given night, it provides shelter for about 550 people, which is about a third of all people experiencing homelessness in Indianapolis. And it's widely known for its shelter services, to the chagrin of some downtown residents. But those services account for just one spoke in a four-pronged strategy to help men, women, and children get the basic services they need, acquire job skills, move to stable housing, and eventually become self-sufficient. And as Rick will tell us, that mission has become much more complicated during his tenure due to the growing prevalence of drug abuse and mental health problems in the homeless population. Now, 70 years old, Alvis is retiring soon and helping ease the transition for his successor, Perry Hines. Hines became Wheeler's Chief Development Officer in 2021 after a long and varied career as an executive in the corporate and not-for-profit worlds. One of his specialties is marketing and communications, and one of his goals will be to broaden the public's understanding of Wheeler's mission. Now, both Alvis and Hines join us this week to talk about Wheeler's evolution over the last 3 decades, perceptions of Wheeler in the community, perceptions of the homeless population downtown in recent years, and why they think it's important that Wheeler remain based downtown. Here's our conversation. I'm pleased to welcome to the podcast Rick Alvis, longtime president and CEO of Wheeler Mission. Rick, thanks for making time today.
It's great to be here. Great to be here.
And we are joined by Perry Hines, the incoming president and CEO of Wheeler Mission.
Hi, Mason. How are you?
I'm doing great. I should also mention Perry has been Wheeler's Chief Development Officer since 2021.
2021, that's correct.
Okay. Tell us what you've been doing.
Well, that's a good question. Ask Rick. He'll probably say pretty much nothing. But no, as a chief development officer for any nonprofit, Mason, our job is to get resources for the organization. Most of the time, those resources are financial resources like donations and in-kind donations, cash donations. But also, it's typically human resources like volunteers as well. So our job as chief development officers to develop the resources so the organization can fulfill its mission. It can do what it needs to do, and typically involves money and people.
Gotcha.
We'll actually hand the baton over to Perry on March the 22nd at our board of directors meeting. And so that'll be my last board meeting that I'll be attending, and he'll take the reins at that point. And it's been a really a good time of just communicating and connecting, and because there's a lot of stuff that goes with this position. And Perry's going to be drinking out of a fire hose here in a couple months.
I have been drinking. Not going to be drinking. I already have been drinking out of a fire hose.
Now, as we were talking before we started recording, we had spoken. I did an interview with you for IBJ about 12 years ago when you were just in your 20th year of leading Wheeler Mission. And you said at the time that you when you started, you didn't think that you would last more than a year or two.
Well, you got a good memory, but you must have watched the video since before this.
Yeah, I don't have a very good memory. So remind me, what changed? How did you end up here for 32 years?
Well, that's the one answer is God. God, drove us here. A good friend of mine who was a CEO of a company in Evansville told me that CEOs need a change of venue every 7 years. And if you look at some businesses, that happens, where CEOs come in. And it seemed like Wheeler was always on the cutting edge of something every 3 or 4 years. And it's really kept my interest and my involvement alive. Nothing has gotten dull in these 30-some years. There's always something new looking at us all the time. And there still continues to be new stuff happening at Wheeler that Perry will have to embrace and go after and answer. And those are the things I think that's kept me motivated to stay here this long. It's just the change that we've had over these 30 plus years. And there's been no dull moments.
I have a couple of stats here that I think give folks a good overview of the scope of the change. So I understand in 1990, Wheeler had 17 employees.
Yes.
And the budget was $700,000.
Yep. Yeah.
Currently, you have 200 employees and an annual budget of nearly $20 million.
Yes. Yes.
How does that feel?
Well, overwhelming because, the other statistic, Mason, it's in the time that I've been here, because one of our board members asked me what I accomplished through the years. And so I started thinking about that. And it took me some time. And I even went back into our financial audits, clear back to 1990. And in this time that I've been here, we have raised over $250 million. $250 million is what we've raised. Yeah.
From, in terms of grants, of donors,
the
whole schmeal.
Yeah. So, that's a lot of money to be raised over the course of 30 some years.
I was going to ask you about this later, but I was going to say, to do all the things that you've done, all the change that we've seen at Wheeler, it takes a lot of money. How did you do that? It's not easy to raise money.
It's not. It's relationships. And not any of that was government money. This is all
private donations.
Of course, Lilly Endowment's been very good to us here, as they've been good to this community. And so it's been connections like that, but mainly individual donors that have had an interest that you build relationships with, that, you can approach to ask for even larger gifts. And so that's a process, but it's an exciting process to do that.
You're coming from a development standpoint.
Sure.
You must be pretty good at it.
I don't know about that, but I've been pretty successful in raising money for several organizations here in town. But Mason, you're asking kind of how you asked Rick, how did he do it? It's really, first of all, it's God, but secondly, it's about relationships. Development and raising money is all about relationships. I mean, you get to the point where, I tell our folks all the time, we don't explicitly ask for money. Right? We ask, how can we help you? How can we help the individual or even the private foundation like Lilly? How can we help you accomplish your objectives? And we just happen to be the conduit to do that.
So 1990, in terms of facilities, Wheeler Mission was what? Was it just what we now call the Men's Residential Center at 245 Delaware? Pretty
much so. Just I mean, that's kind of the mothership of Wheeler. I mean, it's been there since, we've been at that location since 1922. The building's been there since 29. Was built in the Great Depression for $150,000. And so been there all those years. And then we had, at that point, when I came, we have a home. We had a home for girls out on the south side of Indianapolis, Camp Hunt, down by Bloomington, which is 300 acres surrounded by 22,000 acres of state forest. That was it. And of course, we've expanded greatly since that time.
Right. So, for example, we have the Shelter for Men, now 520 East Market Street, and recently was expanded 2021.
Yes.
What would happen at the Shelter for Men?
Well, the shelter for men is where all the emergency men come in for overnights. And that was actually the result of a merge. Lighthouse Mission had been around for 50 plus years. And so back in 2015, we decided, no, it's longer than that. Come to think about it, that was the other merge. 2008, I believe, that Lighthouse Mission merged with Wheeler. And that was a great merge because what was happening was Lighthouse and us were doing the very same thing, and emergency shelter and long-term program. And then when men would wear their welcome at one place, they go to the other mission. So they're just constantly going back and forth, So what happened, it allowed us to just have long-term programs at the 245 North Delaware location. And then we used the Lighthouse facilities over there for, just emergency shelter. And so then we were able to acquire more space over there, another building. We just got finished not long ago. And so that's all emergency shelter for men over there. Yep. And even looking at some different things right now on how we intake people because we're trying to make our environments as safe as possible. So that was a good merge. It was a very good merge.
There is the Center for Women and Children, 3208 East Michigan Street. Yes. Also was expanded in 2021.
Yes, and that one was a merge as well. Back in 2000, what was known as the Care Center over on Washington and Rural merged with us. Then we relocated it over to its current site. I'm not sure what year, but I think that was about 2008 as well. But yeah, then we just got finished with building a brand new facility over there for some $12 million. And it's a beautiful facility, very functional. And we have lots and lots of women and children in that building, and been great having it.
You have recently, and I'm not as up to date on this, entered the Bloomington market.
Yes.
As well. Tell me about that.
2015, we entered the Bloomington market. We have a mission down there that we've been expanding at pretty good rate too down there. Women and children. We have women. Well, no, just women. Just women. Sorry about that. But the men's site is got 3 buildings. It had 1, and now it's got 3 buildings at the same site. So we're actually just dedicating a new building there next week with the mayor of Bloomington is going to come and help us do a ribbon cutting. It's been open, though, for about a month or 2 now because of COVID. We had to postpone the ribbon cutting. We didn't want to expose people, the mayor especially, to COVID. So we decided to delay. It's a beautiful new facility, 80 beds that we've been able to expand into. Making lots more room because we are so jam-packed with people. So, you keeps life interesting as we do. That's why I've been here for 32 plus years.
So I'm venturing in a territory that I don't normally cover. So help me out if I'm wrong.
Okay.
I think it's generally believed that there are about 1,600 people experiencing homelessness in Indianapolis at any given time. Is that consistent with what you guys have?
That's pretty correct, yeah.
Okay. And these are people who are staying in shelters or people who are staying outside or wherever else they can find.
That's correct.
Yeah, a place to be. How many people can Wheeler in Indianapolis provide shelter for on any given night? What's the maximum capacity? And with a caveat that I know it changes sometimes due to the season.
The capacity is actually probably, that's a good question. Our beds does fluctuate, but I know last night we had right around 800 people between Indianapolis and Bloomington. So that meant that we had right around 700 people that we housed here of the 1,600. Our bed capacity is probably more like around, I haven't taken a toll lately, but I think around 600 or so. Is that right?
Yep.
So that means we've got people on the floor. We got mats that we put down. And of course, what we've done too, we've actually had to cut down on our bed space capacity a little bit because of COVID, because our beds were too close. And so during COVID, we had to remove beds to give the social distancing a chance to work. And I hated doing that, but hey, you had to cut down somehow because we like to get as many people in beds and not have them on the floor as possible.
So just bed capacity, 600-ish, and you're almost always surpassing that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All the time. And probably one of the most concerning things to us are the number of new people that we see coming in. And the last probably 2 to 3 years, we've seen an increase of people who are first time finding themselves first time homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And we're entering about, I think this past year, about 3,200 new people into our system, into our data system. And that's a lot of people coming in for the first time. And so that's last year, I think it was about a couple hundred less. I think the year before that was like 100 less. So we're seeing just a slight increase in the number of new people who actually come into our shelters.
And we can talk about this in a little more detail later, but I kind of want to introduce this idea that Wheeler Mission probably has great name recognition in Indianapolis. You have been in the core of downtown, obviously, for more than 100 years. I suspect that for most people, when you say Wheeler Mission, they think, oh, downtown emergency shelter. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a sense of all of the services and programs that you provide. So let's try to do a quick lightning round here and do a census of these things. And I know you divide them, I think, into 4 different categories.
Sure.
The first you call homeless services. What is that?
Which exactly what it is. Just homeless services, just taking people in for a shelter bed for a night and helping them to maybe help them to get some direction in their life too, if we can, if they're open to it. You know, after they've stayed for a few nights, our case managers try to get to them to see, okay, this is where you want to end up for the rest of your life. You know, how can we help you get someplace else, somewhere else? That's one of them.
Residential programs.
Residential programs is a little more complex because there's different people at different levels all the time. They may have an addiction problem, an alcohol or drug problem. If they're in that category, we try to get them to our camp down by Bloomington. Like I mentioned, 300 acres surrounded by 22,000 acres. So if they got an addiction problem, we try to get our men out there and get them away from the environments up here, get them out of where you might say the temptations are for drugs and alcohol. Then there's other men and women who are just down on their luck. They've lost their job. Maybe they don't have an addiction problem. They just have been maybe kicked out of their home, just have some challenges in their lives. Maybe have been evicted from their apartment, mainly because of loss of job. So we try to help get those people back going in the right direction as well.
So Mason, with our residential programs, we really look at it kind of, I don't want to say it's segmented, but we see men, and men have certain needs. We see women, and women have certain needs. And then we see women with children, and they have still additional different needs. And so we need to recognize all of that in our residential planning. And so really the goal is to make sure that we help our guests, and we call them guests, we help our guests secure income, safe, and basically affordable housing. What we do is we try to make sure that they are set up for success in life after they leave our 4 walls. And so that like Rick said, it can encompass things like Bible studies, other programs that help them beyond the emergency shelter services that we also provide. So you were saying that Wheeler has high brand awareness. I say this all the time. We have high brand awareness, but we have low brand knowledge. And so that's one of the things that we are going to be working on in the future.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a little bit. Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and our conversation with Rick Alvis and Perry Hines of Wheeler Mission. Addiction recovery is another rubric. You talked a little bit about that already. Are there other services?
Yeah, and we have a great success rate down at our camp where men go down there, and we have 70 beds down there. we've probably only got about 40 people in the program now. But again, COVID, we're trying to in a rebuilding process. It seems like COVID seemed to really whack that out, and our numbers really plummeted, and now we're back into the growing mode again. But there's no easy fix with addiction. There's I hate to say this, but there's no drive-through on this thing. It takes a long time. We want quick fixes to people's lives. That doesn't happen with this thing of addiction. It takes a duration of time, and I'm talking about months and months, and sometimes for some men it's years, unfortunately, because they just can't kick it. So that's a big part of what we do. And down at our camp, we have most of the staff down there have been former addicts themselves, so they know the games that people play. They're in classes down there, and they're also in a industry. We have a pallet industry that we have them involved in building shipping pallets, because they got to have something to do. You just can't stick men down in the woods and say, give them a Bible and so go heal yourself. They got to have, some activities, some classes. They got to have a way to work their lives, because men are built to work. It's ingrained in us to want to do something. And so this is a way to do that. The women's side also has an industry, which we have they have a candle making industry. And so they're involved. Their addiction program, though, is up here in the city. The women have approached me before, said, can we get a camp like the men have? Well, that would be nice, but these are kind of expensive things to have. And, so we try to do the best we can here in the city.
So unfortunately, Mason, I know we want to go into some social enterprises information, but 60 to 70% of the people we see, what we call dual diagnosed. They're diagnosed with some kind of addiction, drug, alcohol, whatever the addiction is, as well as a mental illness of some type. So 60 to 70% of the people that we see through our doors every night are dual diagnosed. And so we try to make sure we funnel them and work with them in the right way. Sometimes some people, they just need emergency shelter services. We've talked about those. Sometimes they need to go right into our drug addiction recovery programs. And so it's just, we try to work with them, and our counselors do a great job. Our case managers do a great job in trying to figure out and work with them to understand what is best for the individual at that particular time in their life.
So, Rick, how has the population of homeless individuals in Indianapolis changed over the last 30 years?
That's a great question, Mason, because I've seen it change tremendously. When I first came, we probably had a bad night would have been 50 men, at 245 North Delaware, and mainly alcoholics. I came from Evansville Rescue Mission. I was the CEO down there for 10 years, and same there. Pretty much so, mental health, not much. Drug addiction, not much at all. We saw guys down there, I remember, from who had come from Vietnam, who had got addicted to LSD, but nothing like what we're seeing today. And so we've seen a big swing from 50 people, 50 clients to, like I said, 800 total. Matter of fact, I think during COVID, we had 1,200 was a max that we were,
And there are different facilities that
spread all over the place.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen a big swing from just alcoholism. It's kind of neat. When I was in Evansville, I actually used to have Bible studies for the men on the program, and it was all about just alcohol. We had Bible studies, but we talked about they were all alcoholics. They were easier to relate to. But then when you started including up here the drug addiction, and of course all kinds of drug addiction, and our team has a big challenge when they're trying to meet all these different needs: alcoholism, drug addiction, mental health. Mental health has gotten to be a big issue. And so, it's changed dramatically, and it's gotten more and more severe because of just the intensity of what we're dealing with, because it's just not an alcoholic anymore, but it's alcohol and drug addiction together. Sometimes we do see guys or gals who's just drugs, but it's just all over the field, And so that's a challenge to try to design programs around, the multi needs that people have today.
Right. I'd seen in some meeting minutes you were describing the homeless population in Indianapolis, and that you broke it down into 3 tiers. First tier was people who could go into housing immediately.
Yes. Right.
Second tier, a big chunk of them are people with drug and alcohol problems.
Yeah.
And then there's a third tier. The problems are so acute that they are never going to go to your shelter. What percentage of the homeless population is that?
Boy, that's a hard question to ask. It's that last one because there is a segment out there that's never going to come into a shelter. Not even on the coldest day will they come, because they don't want the rules. They don't want to be accountable to anybody. They don't want to be told what to do. They want their freedom. But you almost have to think that is a real serious mental health issue there, because who in their right mind wants to sleep out on the cold sidewalk or in the cold when it's 10 degrees outside? If I'm going to be homeless, I'm going south. Way south.
Yeah. It's such a good question, because I've worked downtown for the last 15 years, and I tend to get to work pretty early, and I will see people who obviously are sleeping outside, and sometimes when it's 5 degrees outside. And the question, from my educated mind is, why isn't this person in a shelter?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to be mental health, in the fact that they don't want to go. They don't want to be inside. They really don't want to even be inside. And it just amazes me.
Mason, too, I also think it's how do I say it? It's sometimes a matter of perception. Downtown Indianapolis right now, it's just starting to come alive with people, but we still are. I don't think it's back yet. I don't think there's a lot of people just hustling and bustling throughout the day and the evening. And then you still have the homeless folks who refuse to come into one of our shelters. So I think that it looks like it's a larger problem than it really is. I think it's because there's not as many people overall downtown, but the homeless have been steady pretty much. And so it's just a matter of numbers, I think, and perception.
Well, you anticipated one of my questions, which is, I think, as we talked about before we started recording, IBJ is doing a big feature. I shouldn't say feature. We're taking over the next issue with stories about all the challenges that are facing downtown after the pandemic. One of the perceptions that we hear a lot from people downtown is, boy, it seems like there are a lot more homeless people downtown. I mean, we know for sure that office workers, we're missing a big chunk of office workers who may never come back. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But is it just because they stand out more? Or are you seeing numbers in your metrics that would indicate there are more homeless people?
Slightly more.
The number's not up drastically.
No, it's not up drastically, but
it is slightly up. It is, particularly of the new folks, Rick. I mean, the numbers that you were talking about before.
Right. But, as far as the number of people out on the streets, many of them just choose to be there. They don't have to be there. They don't have to be there.
We have capacity. We have the bed space. I mean, Indianapolis as a whole, if you look at all the statistics and the studies, we have the capacity. And then you have to ask yourself, why are you choosing not to go into one of the shelters?
And you referred to the homeless count. I mean, that homeless count maybe fluctuates 5% every year. Yeah. It could be up, it could be down. But it's 1,600 is just
pretty
about
steady.
Where it's very steady.
Pretty steady.
And that's Marion County.
It's the point-in-time
Indianapolis,
count.
Marion County, and the point-in-time count.
Yeah.
Okay. To what degree do you think that the community holds Wheeler responsible for the downtown homeless population? And that could mean either it's Wheeler's job to make sure that people experiencing homelessness aren't panhandling or sleeping on the street, or that the homeless are congregating downtown because Wheeler Mission is downtown. I mean, is that a set of perceptions that you have to deal with?
It's kind of, it's kind of an interesting perception, because I think if you removed the Wheeler Mission from downtown Indianapolis, you would see lots more homeless people downtown. Yeah, because they want to be where other people are, and if they're going to go out and panhandle and do those kind of things, they're going to be down here. So we've kind of been, I think, an oasis to attract the homeless to our facility, trying to help downtown, keep them out of the downtown area, out of just this general area right here. So that's been our our goal is to try to attract them away from the downtown. But there's some people out there who are panhandling that they don't stay at our mission. Because I sent a couple of our guys out several months ago and said, I want you to go downtown and I want you to see all the panhandlers. And I want you to see if you recognize any of them.
And they didn't.
They did not see. They saw a few, but not many.
Mm-hmm.
And so the panhandlers are down here who are really not homeless. They're just here to make a buck.
If I just happen to have 100 acres of land near the airport, I said, I'm giving that to you, and you guys can move all of your operations over here to the airport. You don't think that the homeless population would follow you?
I don't think so.
I mean, or at least they would still come back to
they'd stay
downtown. That
It'll be difficult.
It would be difficult.
Because all the other services, the bus services, everything. I mean, think about, and when you're an individual experiencing homelessness, we don't call them homeless. We call them individuals experiencing homelessness, right? And so if you're an individual experiencing homelessness, that's just one aspect. You still want to work. You still have to, there are still other aspects of your life. And so they have to be near population centers typically. And so 100 acres out at, near the airport is not going to do the trick. And so they still would have to find ways to get to where the population centers are. And so it's just been, that's why the historical aspect of what we do, rescue missions around the country, have been those old soup kitchens, those old areas and organizations that have been located typically in major metropolitan areas.
So to best serve your mission, you need to be downtown because
do.
That is where the people you serve are.
We do. We think so.
Yeah, because again, we feel like if we weren't here, you'd see lots more homeless hanging around Circle Center Mall. They'd be, all over. Far worse than what they are now.
Do you still get pushback from nearby residents or nearby businesses saying, "Hey, we love what you do, but could you do it somewhere else?"
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. Oh yes. Yeah, all the time. I mean, that's kind of normal.
We've seen a lot more of that, don't you think, Rick, in Bloomington than we have downtown Indy with the businesses. And
we've been able to help downtown Bloomington really well because several years ago they had a real issue down on Kirkwood over at the university, and that the folks who found themselves homeless were just congregating over there, and the Kirkwood business people were getting really upset, and so we opened our doors out on the west side. And we did attract them down there, but it's within walking distance too. Yep. The airport's not within walking distance. You'd have to provide transportation back and forth there, which would get very, very pricey.
Yep. Sure. But yes, we have heard criticism before, and we'll always hear that probably, Mason. But we've been blessed and fortunate over the years to have a great working relationship with all the other agencies in town, the partnerships, the city agencies. So I think we have a reputation of being an organization who is looking to solve problems and coming to the table with possible solutions. And so we've been at it for 130 years. We have expertise. And that's one of the reasons the city called on us to help them run the hotels during the pandemic. No one was going to build more bricks and mortar because no one knew how long the pandemic was going to last. But still, you had the need. And Wheeler had the expertise and the resources to help meet the need. And so
are you still doing that? Or is a population of people in hotels in downtown Indianapolis?
No, they've closed all those hotels to this. Yeah.
Okay.
But we've had a great relationship with the city of Indianapolis. For several years now. We love working with the city. How long we can work with the city. They depend on us. Yeah. They sincerely depend on what we're doing here in the community.
Our good relationship even spans to places like Broad Ripple. We do our Drumstick Dash, our largest single, fundraiser. And so we work for months and months with the city officials in Broad Ripple, to enable to do that on Thanksgiving morning. So we look at ourselves as being a partner to help solve problems in the communities that we operate. But for the most part, we get criticism, Mason, but I don't think it's, something we haven't heard before.
And to be very, very honest and transparent, we're not here just to house people.
Mm-hmm.
If we could wave a wand and make homelessness go away, we'd do it. We would really do it. But we realize it's going to be around. And so we have to address it. But really what we're about is, we just don't want to warehouse people. We really want to be able to help force, and not force, I guess if we could force it, we'd do it. But we'd love to see people experience life transformation, to get out of the homeless rut they're in, to get out of the addiction cycle. Mental health is a little bit different of an animal because it's just all what was tied to that. We'd love to see people being productive. We're not here to create homelessness. We're here to help solve homelessness and to get people out of that whole cycle. That's what we want to partner to do.
So to my count, and this I'm sure is not authoritative, there are about a dozen shelters with overnight beds in Indianapolis for men, women, and or children.
Not really.
Okay.
No, you got that number. That's high.
Yeah. It's high. Yeah. There's we're the largest, of course. And there's probably 3 or 4 others that actually shelter people.
Okay. And do you coordinate with them?
Yes.
I mean, for example,
absolutely,
you mentioned, at one point there was the merger, for example, with Lighthouse and with another organization because there was too much duplication.
In the wintertime, we coordinate with all the shelters that are involved in this because we want to get their beds filled before we take any. Well, that doesn't really happen. That hasn't happened for a long time. It seems like we just take them in, but we try to coordinate the best that we possibly can because we're all in it together.
Yep. Mm-hmm. If you could wave your wand and accomplish a couple more things in the next year, what needs to be done? What are the next steps?
Well, I've always said that if I had another 30 years here, which I don't, and I don't want, but I would, I would really like to see more in the development of supportive housing or
we call it supportive care.
Supportive care. The reason our shelters are so full is because we have nowhere to send people. There is no low-cost shelter or low-cost housing anywhere. Now, there's being efforts by the city and others to create more units, but they're not fast enough. They're just not fast enough. I mean, like I said, we're seeing over 3,000 new people come into our system. That means there's 3,000 people coming into, homelessness in a year's time. So if we're going to do that, we got to create 3,000 housing units. Well, that's not going to happen. There's not that much capacity to do that. And so that's what I would really focus on if I was going to be around is, to expand into that area more than what we already are. Mm-hmm. It's a huge need because if we could create housing, low-cost housing, I would think that our numbers should and could be able to fall.
Yeah, it's basically what can we do to help them be successful once they leave the 4 walls of one of our facilities, right? And so if we can partner with, and we are looking and working with, CDCs like Inglewood and other organizations to work on those issues and come alongside them, because if they do the housing part, we can do the services part, the wraparound services, everything else. If they just get the housing with developers built, we could come alongside them and do all that other supportive care for people who are transitioning out of our facilities into the affordable housing and with all those supportive care issues. And so we're real excited by that. And I think that is one of the major initiatives that you'll start to see here in the next couple of years. And so there's always a capital campaign somewhere, Mason. And so, just stay tuned.
My thanks again to Rick Alvis and Perry Hines. One of the issues that we discussed, but had to leave out of the podcast due to time constraints, was the city of Indianapolis's plan for a low barrier shelter and to create a master leasing program in which the city would lease units on behalf of property owners to low or no income individuals. Rick Alvis was on the state task force that developed recommendations for the shelter. IBJ does address this story in its latest print issue, devoted almost entirely to downtown Indianapolis and the challenges and opportunities it faces. I'll give you a taste of some of the other stories. Reporters John Russell and Mickey Shuey have the lead piece that details the dichotomies of downtown at its latest crossroads. with more than $9 billion in development either underway or in the pipeline, while many office workers choose to work remotely. Mickey Shuey and Taylor Wooten look at the persistent perception that downtown is one of the most dangerous parts of the city, and whether the latest crime statistics square with that belief. And Daniel Bradley gets the perspective of people who live downtown, a population that many believe will be vital to downtown's future success as it transitions to more of a residential area. Again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And I will say that it's easier to access all of the latest local news about business and politics and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. And here's a new development. We have wrapped all of IBJ's content together with all of the stories, columns, and podcasts from our sister publication, Inside Indiana Business. And now works out to about $3 per week for actionable information about every notable business development across the state. You won't find Indiana's story told with this kind of breadth and depth anywhere else. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.